Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your hosts Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 4 of season 5. Sam and I had a recent discussion around Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, an antivirus and EDR solution for user endpoints and servers. Here are a few things we covered. What is Microsoft Defender Endpoint and how did it become a leading EDR solution? What capabilities does Microsoft Defender for Endpoint provide? How is Defender for Endpoint different from other AVs and EDR solutions? And how is it licensed?
We've noticed a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how are you this week?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. I don't really have any updates from the week, to be totally honest with you, technology wise and Microsoft wise. I'm sure there's been a fair few things I've seen, but I can't really think of anything. Is there anything that's been announced or released recently?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. Been sort of diving into work really this week. It's been
Yeah,
pretty busy, so not a chance to sort of venture outside of the day to day.
yeah. I definitely think it's the sort of lag of Christmas is or holiday
Gone.
season is definitely over now, right? It's just I think it's like slowly got busier and busier. You know, I think you had like maybe you had everybody returning generally back to work second week of January, or either first or second week of January, then all of the delays that happened over Christmas, and then everyone's like, we want to get things moving, X, Y, Z, right? So it just sort of, just sort of catapults along ahead, doesn't it? So
Yeah, definitely. We've got loads of projects that we're just like
yeah,
just cracking on with.
yeah,
Yeah, I've been on some of the preview stuff, which I can't talk about at the moment. So I suppose I do know a few things, but yeah, all that sort of kicked off, I guess, last week or the week before around new badges for the program and some of the new updates sort of in that area. So we should probably do an episode on that actually around
yeah.
that community.
I was just thinking about that. Definitely calling out that there is a like a it's called the customer connection program, isn't it? Is it
Yeah,
CC? Is that what CCP stands for? So yeah, it's sort of a way to help give feedback to Microsoft about up and coming product updates. So I think the only real requirement is that your company's NDA'd. Is that right? Mainly
yeah,
because it's open to end user orgs as well, isn't it? It's not just partners and
correct. Yeah,
MVPs, right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you haven't got an NDA in place, they're sort of organise that to be put in place. So it's not
Yeah,
like
exactly.
if you don't have it, that's it. You're out.
No, 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 no. But
So
that's if you've already got that in place with Microsoft, it's a relatively easy sign up. So yeah, definitely check that out because yeah, we'll definitely do an episode on it as well because it's worth calling out in its own right because you get some really good access to some really nice people in the community and also Microsoft as well, right? And you help to shape product direction as well. So instead of just sort of waiting for updates to be drip fed to you as it becomes public preview or GA, you get to shape some of that. Not everything, but you get to shape a lot of it, right, as well. And you get badges and stuff, swag. So,
yeah,
yeah, it's cool.
it's all about swag. No, it's not. Um,
uh, cool. What were you talking about this week, Alan?
so I think last week I said that we haven't done a Defender for Endpoint um, episode, so I think it's time to kind of talk about that this time because I think it's this we've sort of not we just thought it's been sort of there, and we assume that we talk about it all the time. I think in various episodes because it's
Yeah,
kind of key to some areas, but we never actually talked about it.
yeah. It's
So
definitely how did I describe it today? Like the glue between a lot of things, isn't it? Right.
yeah,
So yeah, it's quite a pivotal part of the 365. Well, it's not just 365; it's also Azure as well. Microsoft security stack solution, whatever words you want to use for it. So no, it's going to be good. Going to be a good episode, I think.
yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, no, let's we'll see how we go. Right, so Alan, let's get moving. What is Defender for Endpoint, and sort of, can you give us a brief history, where it's come from, what it is now?
Yep. So today it's sort of two parts. So Defender for Endpoint is a antivirus and anti-malware solution for on Windows, as well as on other various platforms. And then it has a endpoint detect and response capability today with some various areas around that. But probably to talk about its history. So let me think about this now. So um, Windows Defender started coming into play. I think it was Windows 8, maybe. I can't quite remember. But definitely was baked into Windows 10 and Windows 11 as a antivirus solution that was baked into Windows. And previous to that, it was called, I'm going to say, Security Essentials. I think it was on Windows 7 and previous. Um, and I believe that when that came out and Microsoft sort of had it and it was free, I think the AV solution got a bad name for itself. Bad rep, that it not being too great. Um, and then when it became into Windows 10, Windows 11, it kind of kept that, I guess, bad trait or bad feedback around it, in that it was just what it was previously, but just rebranded, sort of thing. But over the years, over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, if at least, Microsoft have been investing, into that capability to enhance it, to improve it, and then they brought in Defender for Endpoint, which then was the EDR next gen protection kind of solutions, and brought that into sort of Windows, sort of the start of Windows 10 and then definitely Windows 11. So today, Defender for Endpoint, there are two plans. We'll talk about that sort of later. But you've got vulnerability management, so detecting some of the capabilities or vulnerabilities in your OS. We've got attack surface reduction. We've got next gen protection, so using the cloud and the Microsoft Security Graph to identify 0-day potential attacks, and then protecting against them near real time. Endpoint detection response, like I said, we've got automatic investigation and remediation, and then we have got Microsoft Threat Experts as part of that sort of solution. So it's definitely come a long way now, and when you look at like the AV tests that are coming out now, it's coming up as being one of the top solutions now, and I think on the Gartner the Gartner quadrants, it's now in the top right, sort of starting to sort of lead along around with some of the other EDR XDR solutions.
Yeah, um, we definitely see, I would say, a confidence in the product, like in the enterprise space,
Mm.
don't we? I don't know. It might just be the circles that I sort of travel in, but I see very little negativity of the sort of the efficacy of the detection or response element, right? Um, I I don't know. The thing for me, as I suppose, is I do see a lot of organizations putting it in place, but then again, we also work with a lot of organizations that have it in place day to day, and we don't really seem to get a lot of pushback in terms of how effective it's been in responding to incidents, right? Its
N-
capability.
No, and I think probably a couple of years ago when EDR part came out, Defender for Endpoint part came out, very people were very cautious about the solution because of its previous history, previous like versions of it not being so great. Um, and yeah, I think that at that point there was probably a lot of resistance to move against other AV and EDR solutions that have been out there, because they've been out there for 2, 3, 4 years, maybe longer side of things. So But because of the latest improvements, upgrades, features, the integrations with the other parts of the suite, it kind of became front and center. And then with the AV tests and the other parts being done, sort of third party validation that it is a potential is a good AV and EDR solution, then it's now brought that confidence back up into, well, is it much different to what my other AV EDR solution does? Is it above, and can I consolidate my services into sort of one solution?
Yeah, and do you think a lot of that coverage and maturity, I suppose, comes from because they effectively have a free antivirus product, don't they, in just regular Windows Defender? Like, you went and bought a PC and it would come automatically with Defender on it. I mean, you'd probably have some bundled something else, from whoever you bought it from, right? But if you didn't want to pay for antivirus as a personal home user, you would have the benefit of Windows Defender anyway. Just antivirus, malware, no EDR capability there. But I suppose they've got the huge user base, haven't they, of all of those signals flowing in. So, because I don't know, but I assume that a lot of people do, but also a lot of people don't purchase antivirus products or at least keep those subscriptions active, right? After a free trial period in a personal sense, right? So there must be a huge user base of just Defender across
Yeah,
Windows, right?
yeah. I guess there is. I mean, I've been probably using Defender for personal Windows Defender for personal use for forever now, because it's been easier to sort of manage. I guess it's, and also if you've got a Microsoft 365 personal or family subscription now, you get the EDR capability
Right. Okay.
now, sort of
Yeah.
baked.
Okay.
It's sort of, you don't see the back end of it, but it's like you get that EDR capability automatic. It's almost like I guess similar to like Defender for Business, maybe, where you don't see as much from a back end. It's just in automatic mode sort of thing. So again, you're getting more signals there going into the solution.
Yeah. 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 100%. So yeah, should we dive in a little bit further, because you did talk about a lot of different capabilities there. I suppose are we going to jump into some of those now and talk about platforms that it covers and other features?
Yeah. So originally, as we kind of said, it all sort of Defender for Endpoint was always based on Windows operating system. That is, it's Microsoft's first party operating system. So it was baked in, and that. But Microsoft have, over the years, been moving into the other areas. So it now does Mac OS, um, for AV and EDR. Um, it's been doing mobile threat defense for Android and iOS. So not quite the same as your typical AV and EDR, but definitely looking at scanning your applications and checking your sort of vulnerabilities on your endpoint there for your mobile devices. And then recently, oh well, not recently, they've been doing Windows Server, um, and they now recently start moving into the Linux space, and that's now sort of covering majority of I guess, the operating systems. I don't think it's doing Unix at the moment, from sort of the Linux side. But there are some key sort of OSs that they do cover within the Linux side. Yeah, so that's kind of what they're covering now, and majority of them are quite mature, with new features coming across the board with those. Um, and and yeah, I don't know what other OSs they might sort of cover. Well, I talked about WSL, didn't I? The couple of weeks ago. I guess that's another one that's in public preview for the WSL environment on a Windows device. Um, I guess there might be in the future, if Chromebooks can have an AV on them if it needs it. I don't know. It's a good question. It might be based on Android maybe. But yeah, so that's kind of the platforms they cover. So cover the main ones today. And yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think what's sort of management like on all of those platforms? Because hasn't it traditionally been a bit? We've had good coverage of like management of Windows machines, Mac, Android, iOS, but hasn't Linux been a bit lacking from a configuration and management perspective? But I think that's changed recently, hasn't it, for Defender for Endpoint?
Yeah, I have to double check that, but in essence, and we'll probably talk about this. Probably sort of diving into why is Defender for Endpoint sort of different to other EDR solutions, um, and that's because, especially on Windows, um, it's baked. The Windows AV is baked into the operating system, so it's there no matter what. If you have another AV on there, then it goes into sort of passive mode or turns itself off because it understands that there's another AV in place. Um, but because it's baked into Windows, with other AV and EDR solutions, you would configure the AV settings via the AV portal console, whether it's on premise, in the cloud, etc. But because it's part of Windows, you actually manage it in group policy or Intune, depending on where you are on your journey, and that's quite different because you don't really have, you don't go to a console and go, "Oh, I need to change this config." It is like you would do, group policy changes for the device itself, and same with Intune. So when you're doing updates to configuration, they're sometimes not instant changes because the console's not constantly being queried about if there's any updates. It's more that it's waiting for group policy to, refresh, or Intune to push the configuration down. So it is very different on how you configure it. And sometimes with some of the customers you get, they expect it to be sort of I make a change, it's instantly updated kind of thing, or I need to be able to like force a sync or something. Yes, you can do that on, you can do GP updates and you can do Intune syncs, but it's based on when they're happening. You can also configure Defender for Endpoint with Config Manager, and that's whenever the Config Manager decides to do that sync as well. So it's definitely very different in that sense, but the benefit, I guess the benefit is that it's baked in to the operating system, so it's sort of layers in where an AV or a potential attacker can. It's more difficult to disable it because it's part of the operating system. It's not like something you can uninstall because it's there. Yes, you can attempt to disable it, and yes, there is functionality within Defender for Endpoint to prevent tampering with it. So that's where it's different. And with Mac and Android and iOS, you could configure them with Intune if they're Intune enrolled. That was how it was previously, and like you said, with Linux, you'd in effect have to create a config file and then deploy it to the endpoints originally. So you'd have to use Ansible. Um, I can't remember some of the other ones that you can use, um, but some of the other sort of Linux management tools deploy that config out, so then they get that to then determine what they do. Um, in the last 6 to 12 months, probably the last 6 months to be fair, Microsoft have moved it so that you can do direct attached. And so what that means is that, especially for Windows Server, Windows, Mac, um, and what I think is also Linux, um, they can now connect to, when they get onboarded and you've enabled direct attach. It then allows them to um, partially enroll the EDR, the Defender for Endpoint part, into Intune. So they're EDR managed or MDE managed, but Intune's able to push config to them, and Intune's being used to hold the config for them and to deploy it. So that's the new part. So you're starting to get that centralized location for your configuration. Um, what Microsoft have also done with the portal is that even though it's within Intune, the actual the config is in there. Um, you can admins can see it in the Defender for Endpoint or the Defender XDR portal as a sort of mirroring what you can see. So you don't have to have somebody know Intune. They can just go to Defender XDR and update the config there, and they just go to one place. They don't have to know. They don't have to know how to manage Intune or use the portal. So I think that's really good in itself. So yeah, there has been some new stuff there to help with that centralized management. Not all config. Um, a lot of the config now can be done, but some of the config can't be done that way. There is still stuff that hasn't been brought over. Not unless you're full Intune managed, where you can Intune manage a device.
Yes, I suppose the benefit from a Windows side is that the way that you configure it for organizations should feel quite natural to what they're currently doing with configuration of their actual machines, right? You know,
Yeah,
it, it's just another set of config, whether that be Intune or group policy, however you manage either of those things. You know, if you have those in your organization, because we could, for larger organization, we should assume that they're at least using group policy, right? We could probably make that assumption,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, and
at a minimum.
that's kind of where I was saying that it's very different because you expect to be able to go to a console and just do that configuration, and
Yeah,
they all all the agents then communicate, or the EDR solution communicates with that
yeah,
console. Where this is no, it's actually like device config. It is very different, but like you said, it can then simplify because you've already got those mechanisms in place.
yeah, yeah. Because if you've got a like a baseline config for your organization for your endpoints, you effectively could just add in the config to whatever management solution you use, and like away you go. There isn't a separate. I suppose there is a separate place to view the metrics that come out of Defender because it's got its own portal, right? But the actual config and how you manage it, okay, yeah, you've got to learn that because you've got to understand what the config is because it's going to be different to what you're currently using. But if you're an organization that jumps between AV and EDR vendors based on your current pricing renewals, that can almost be more disruptive anyway, right? Because if you move from vendor A to vendor B, it's going to be a completely different shift in what you do, or you're at the mercy of that singular vendor. I suppose you could also say that you're at the mercy of Microsoft in some ways as well, because you're consolidating, putting everything, all eggs in like one basket, aren't you? You know, really. Um, so I suppose, so there are a bunch of pros there because it's very similar to what they're doing today. But then the con of that situation previously is when it's non Microsoft or non Intune, it became complicated, or
Yeah,
it was different, right? So the Linux was the good example of was it Ansible, Puppet, and Chef, I think, something like that, they give you
yeah,
scripts for. um, and if you're an organization that's mature enough to have um, stateful configuration of your machines, I'm not sure how many, take every Linux server in the world, like how many are actually used under those. I bet you it's a good percentage of them, but I would also bet there's a lot of just manually configured machines out there. Um, so that is a challenge that we have seen before because you start talking to the Linux server estate, admins. Nothing wrong with the actual people themselves. It just wasn't a great solution unless you met those requirements, was there? So I suppose it's also good that that's now a thing. That whereas previously, even with those third-party EDR solutions, they would have their own separate portals, so they could at least have some level of management and like updating of. But I also don't know. I don't know because I haven't been one of those admins on how effective that management tooling was for Linux. Is it immature in those other vendors? I honestly don't know because I haven't been in that situation before.
and I mean, as we're sort of talking around Linux, I guess the other question as well, what we're seeing with some customers is that they don't have any AV
Yeah, yeah,
on their Linux
100%. Yeah,
estate,
yeah,
and you know, we've had it with some customers that we've put that AV on there, and they're like, "Well, it's using the CPU too much,"
Yeah.
or a few other things where it's just not necessarily a misunderstanding, but they're not used to having an AV on there, and in effect, the reason why they don't have an AV is because the previous AV did the same thing or appeared to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And it might just be a characteristic of how Linux displays the CPU and stuff. Maybe, I mean, I'm not a Linux expert or anything like that, but you know,
No, no, but I think you've also got to in those scenarios where an organization hasn't had an antivirus or EDR solution on, let's say, their Linux servers previously, we've also got to account for whatever overhead that is going to place
mm,
on that server because they
yeah,
might be sized for their workloads already,
yeah,
and whereas traditionally, maybe Windows servers have a higher uptake of antivirus, or maybe antivirus on web servers on Linux only runs nightly, for new uploads, or you know, we just don't. I suppose there's so many different scenarios there. It's probably not worth trying to generalize that, but I think the point I think we're talking about here is that Linux management is okay. Um, and the process for onboarding and offboarding is relatively simplistic as well, right? So it's not like too much of an issue to start pushing out to your test fleet or your staging environment to see how your workloads actually react before you go, you know, everywhere.
yeah, and I think as well, well, without knowing other AV and EDR solutions, I think they'd probably be in a very similar situation, because I think this is kind of the way, not because of Linux, but because of how they can interact with the config and stuff like that. It might be that it's the same sort of I
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
concept,
Well,
or
yeah, but if you think like Windows is okay, there's different versions of Windows Server, Endpoint, well, Windows,
mhm.
Windows Server. Maybe you've got your IoT versions and your embedded versions, but relatively they're very similar, aren't they? Whereas Linux, I mean, we haven't even talked about Linux desktop, so I suppose we could probably do that as well. But um, Linux server, there's however many different distributions, hundreds, if not at least hundreds, if not thousands, right? And they all have different package management. They all have different ways you interact with the system, different UIs, package managers, X, Y, like there's loads of things going on there. So what I'm quite excited to see is the coverage that they do have in that space. I think the reason why I'm talking about it is I think it's good for people to understand that they are thinking very cross-platform. It's not just Windows. It's not just Android. It's Mac, iOS, Android, Windows, Linux. Like there is a relatively good coverage there. It might not work for every single use case, and it might be that you can only run Defender for Endpoint on your Windows endpoints, and your server estate you might need to license with something else potentially. You know,
Yeah, and from a capability sort of enhancement, it's probably worth mentioning. Yes, Windows tends to get it first, but let's bear in mind that Microsoft own the operating system, so they are able to push that config quite easily. And with the other operating systems, they may be tied to what access they're given to them. If you think about Apple and what APIs that it's allowed to plug into and to do that detection and things like that. So um, yes, Windows gets it first, but where I've seen that the updates have gone out to Mac, Mac OS next, and then if it's relevant for Android and iOS, then that happens, and then it continues on to Linux now. So
yeah. So Alan, you talked about vulnerability management in the first intro part. Should we just dive into that a little bit more?
yeah, so as part of the Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, it's probably worth maybe just quickly talking about the two plans. So Defender for Endpoint Plan 1 is in effect the AV and anti-malware. So yes, that is part of um, your license for Windows. But what it does is the Defender for Endpoint Plan 1 part then hooks up to the central console to allow you to see, alerts and, AV status, things like that. So it kind of becomes that central console, because if you don't have, in effect, Defender for Endpoint Plan 1 or Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, you're not able to see the current status without running scripts or having, I think you might be able to do it with Config Manager if you've got that in place. So to be able to see essentially whether AV is turned on, that it's configured, etc., you need to have it hooked up using Defender for Plan 1. But in Plan 2, you get vulnerability management as part of it. So this is, in effect, because Defender for Endpoint is constantly looking at the machine. It knows what the OS version is, what the application versions are, what services are running, etc., all the time. And then using its Microsoft's vulnerability sort of catalog that they've got, provided through various other sort of sources feeding into them, they're able to detect vulnerable software. So you're able to see whether you need to update Microsoft Edge, Windows, Adobe, etc. So you're able to see that. You're able to see which devices have it. You can dive in a bit more around the CVEs and see how severe they are, or what type of risk it causes. With some of those vulnerabilities, you can, I believe, put exclusions on them, because it might be that you have old software and you have to have them installed. I'm thinking more around the Java versions, because you might have some really old Java versions for Java applications, which you might be mitigating the risk by containerizing it in something like AppV or MSIX, or you might be putting other security restrictions on the config for it. But yeah, so you can see all of that. So you can see what sort of your exposure score is. So the higher the score, the worse you are. That's just kind of showing that you may have multiple vulnerabilities within the operating system or the applications. This works for pretty much all the operating systems, I believe, actually. So you can see from a Android device or iOS, you can see if an iOS device is out of date. If we think about the recent hot fix that went out for iOS in the last week or so, I think it was, wasn't it? You can see whether your devices are up to date and whether they're still vulnerable. So you can track your risk in effect. Whilst the part of the vulnerability management sort of side of things, you can it puts it in a priority order for you, so where your biggest risks are. But also you can set up a remediation task. So the remediation task allows you to, in effect, track the exposed devices and see, as they're being patched, in effect, the status. So you can see that a remediation for an update to Java, for example, is 100% complete, kind of thing. As part of that remediation task, if you had a different sort of Intune team or a device management team that didn't have access to the portal, when you create a remediation task, you can create a security administration task in the Intune portal, so that those admins can see that the security team has requested that this application gets patched. So yeah, that's it in a sort of quick thing. It's very powerful. It's very quick to sort of update. It's not necessarily scanning like once a week or anything like that. It's updating as it sees changes. So the data tends to be up into the portal quite quickly, with the interfaces sort of taking a little bit longer just to update to say that's been remediated. But generally, you can see that you can almost see that when when that application was updated within the logs all the timelines.
Yeah, having that visibility of your vulnerabilities built in is really powerful, right? Because traditionally that would be licensed separately as a separate product. Is
Yeah.
is probably fair to say, right? Have we done an episode on the vulnerability management add-on? We have done it, haven't we? It's just Defender for
Season
Endpoint that we haven't done.
season
Yeah.
2, episode 14. You you beat me to it, but
Okay,
yes.
yeah. Um, so, um, but i- what I think isn't really talked about, I suppose, is how good the vulnerability management that just comes out of like base Defender for Endpoint is.
Mm.
Right? There are additional things that you can do with vulnerability management. Don't get me wrong, 100%. And in some certain circumstances, you definitely need it. But the amount of vulnerability information you do get back from Defender for Endpoint is really rich and really valuable, isn't it? And can feed into other risk modifiers about machines. So I know it's not free, you've paid for it, it's included as part of the Defender for Endpoint, like, well, depends how you license it, but your package. But it's still really powerful to have that all integrated into one singular solution.
Yeah, and it's been there pretty much from what I can remember from very early stages. It's not like it's a new feature recently. I mean, it's enhanced. Features within it is enhanced during the years, but it was sort of one of the first sort of functionalities that came out of it. And again, it was probably that the whether it sort of stands to be the same as products like Qualys, is to be I've not done any comparison around it, but from when you've bought an AV EDR solution, then you've got vulnerability management. I guess the question is how much, at least for your endpoints that you're covering and your servers that you're covering, you know what more do you need, what other services do you need to look for vulnerabilities within it? Is it baselines for CIS and things like that? That is part of that other license that's available to include that. If you buy Defender for Server Plan 2 from Defender for Cloud, you get the vulnerability management add-on. It's probably worth mentioning. So you can have all that other functionality. It is just feeding in. And probably one thing we haven't sort of mentioned actually is um, the device gets like a risk score of like clear, no issues, low, medium, high risk, and that can feed into a compliance policy in Intune. So you can say that you're only compliant if you've got like a lower than a low risk or no issue, and then when you become non-compliant, you can stop access to cloud services using additional access. So it does tie in that way. Would you be able to? And it's kind of coming into that sort of integration sort of perspective. Could you get Qualys to give you a risk score of a device and then tell conditional access that no, a device couldn't connect now because it's high risk? And when does it next scan? I don't know. Maybe there is sort of a plugin or something, but I've not sort of dived into that area.
Yeah, I think what I've heard from customers that are looking to consolidate, that is definitely a challenge for them, plugging different pieces of technology together. And that's typically done by some sort of custom integration. uh, From my experience, that's me tarring all these solutions with a brush, right? Which probably isn't accurate, because like you say, there are probably integrations, plugins. We see it a lot with VPN providers, networking provide, like there are integrations. It would be unfair to not call out the great work that the vendors have done to integrate different solutions. But I don't think anybody could really argue about how tightly connected and integrated all the Defender solutions are, really. And that's probably worth actually talking about now, actually, about how it does integrate. And we used the word glue previously, earlier, about how it does fit together.
Yeah. Okay. So really, even so Defender for Endpoint, like we said, is kind of quite key to some of the other sort of areas to feed them or help them provide services to the endpoints. And in when Defender for Office and Defender for Identity or Azure Advanced Threat Protection then um, came out, Microsoft already brought in this sort of connectivity between those solutions quite early on with the sort of automated capabilities. So in effect, I think I've talked about this before, but in effect, if you get a an email that comes through, goes through Defender for Office, isn't weaponized at the moment, etc. Gets to the endpoint, a user clicks on it, it's a 0-day, no one knows about it. It starts behaving irregular, whatever the user has executed on the endpoint, irregular on the endpoint. Defender for Endpoint starts kicking in, starts sort of blocking activity. But as it's doing that, it's feeding the Defender XDR portal within the information about what's happening. And as part of that sort of automatic investigation, it starts going, hang on, it looks like it came in from an email. Okay, let's go and check Defender for Office. So it goes off to Exchange, starts querying about this email, rescans it, and checks and goes, oh, actually, it's now been weaponized, and another 30 people have got it. The email. Okay, right, now let's tell Defender for Endpoint now to block that attachment. So now it can't spread. So that's it. Attack now, neutralized locally. Okay, now let's get Exchange to now do a 0-hour purge. Let's go and remove that mail from everyone's mailboxes so they can't click on it. That's that integration. It could then tie into, going into Defender for Identity and going, hey, what's the user doing? Because I've got the logs now from Active Directory or Microsoft Entra now. What's the activity? Is it unusual? Oh, it is, right. Okay, I need to start now flagging up that there's unusual activity in in the account. So now you're starting to bring in all this technology and it's telling you all this information from multiple sort of solutions. And again, this is kind of tying into that Defender XDR sort of solution that I talked about a couple of weeks ago. I think it was. Can't remember. But that sort of initial bit with those three sort of technology, Microsoft solutions was there from quite early stage. 1 or 2 years ago, before XDR, Extended Detector Response, was sort of in play. So Microsoft were already starting to do that with their products, and now they've included all the other ones. But kind of what we're talking about with some of the other integrations is that if you've got Defender for Cloud apps, and you want to do cloud discovery, before Defender for Endpoint was sort of integrated with it, you had to run a log collector for your proxy, or your firewall to collect the data. Now with the integration, because Defender for Endpoint can see what domains and URLs the users are going to, that now feeds that dashboard, that cloud discovery report. And that doesn't matter where the user is. They don't have to go for a proxy now. It can be wherever it is, which is absolutely great. And that data gets up there pretty quickly. And then you've got things like Endpoint DLP now. That's part of the Sense agent that Defender for Endpoint runs. And again, that's collecting all that data anyway about what's happening on the device. And now it's feeding Purview. Just having that agent on there is, providing multiple services without the user even knowing and having to install multiple agents. So yeah, that integration is definitely sort of key, and Defender for Endpoint is sort of the glue, I guess. Like you said, it's definitely core to the Defender XDR or Microsoft sort of solutions.
Yeah, and lots of these solutions can work without it. They
Yeah.
can all sort of work in their own right, integrate in different ways. But yeah, like you say, one single agent doing multiple things. And I think because organizations are very cost sensitive. I don't know if they always have been, but they definitely are at the moment. That's definitely a conversation that we regularly have. And so, the adage of, putting all your eggs in one basket, kind of is going, it's not going out the window, but it's being talked about a lot less in favor of hitting budget constraints, because what organizations don't want to do is they don't want to lose coverage, create gaps. They don't want to lose capability. So in some respects, this is a good halfway house, really, of still having good coverage, but not having to license multiple like point solutions. It's all integrated.
Yeah, and I think a lot of organizations are seeing yes, there may be a single point solution that is, the top of best of breed kind of thing, but you haven't got that integration or ease of integration, I should say, to be able to for them to for all the services to communicate with each other to see that holistic view.
Yeah.
And again, we're kind of talking about the Defender XDR part of it, but like we said, Defender for Endpoint kind of did that from the start, whether you had the other services or not. And
Yeah, and I don't think we can deny the size of Microsoft in this space and the amount of investment that they've made in it, right? Because those point solutions are narrower in their focus. I mean, there are outliers there that are trying to do, multiple things and, connect systems and have an integrated solution 100%. But typically we see one tool for one job, isolated, siloed, licensed separately, and then you add all of those together and you're already paying your productivity license to Microsoft. You're already paying your Windows license in some way as well to Microsoft. So the proposition is really quite good. We'll talk about licensing, but you can package it all up in one thing. It's easy to, well, once you've you know fallen off your chair, gotten off the floor about how much all these things cost, and then you realize that you can reduce and consolidate. And we have seen the efficacy of the solution in practice, and there are organizations relying on this day to day and the integration, which everybody is positive. What? Not everybody. Lots of people, I should say, the majority are positive about. Because I suppose I wouldn't be in a conversation where they are offboarding Defender for Endpoint because my skill set wouldn't be needed in that conversation, right? Um, but I just don't hear of that happening day to day in my travels.
yeah, it's quite true. I don't think. I mean, obviously, we're in the market for putting Defender for Endpoint everywhere, um, but I don't think the customers we've worked with have ever, at the moment at least, have ever decided to move away from it and from the ecosystem at
Yeah.
the moment. I mean, don't get me wrong, they'll be tied into licenses for X time, but
Yeah.
I
It'd
don't.
be interesting to see if anybody is listening, if they ever, if you want to submit a, a form into us, and get in contact with us if you know of anybody or your organization's gone through offboarding Defender for Endpoint recently, I would say as well. With changes in product, it'd be really interesting to see why that was done. Whether there was another vendor that had good price parity or better performance, or some other metric which meant, or it wasn't a good fit for your organization. Maybe you tried it, didn't like it, and stuck with your current uh AV and EDR. That might be a more common scenario, but it'd be interesting to see if anybody ripped it out and went back to an incumbent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be interesting.
Yeah,
But yeah,
definitely. Yeah, so Alan, talking of money, how much? Well, how do you license it? It's
yeah, I'm not
Microsoft,
going to
so.
talk about pricing because it's all the SKUs and everything. But
What do you mean you don't
so
know off the top of your head and every single
well, I know Defender.
concoction
I
of
think I know Defender for cloud licensing. So okay, I'll talk about that. But
a moment?
okay, I know. So Windows. Okay, so user based. So licensing is user based for the endpoint. So that includes um, Windows, Mac, and Android and iOS. I don't know if it includes desktop Linux. That's a good question. I don't know that. But those ones are covered under a single user license. Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 is part of that for the EDR and AV. You can buy it as on its own. You can buy it as part of the Microsoft 365 E5 security uplift, as well as the Microsoft 365 E5 SKU. It's also part of, if you just want to, it's kind of, there is Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, but it's also included in the Windows Enterprise E5, which has other sort of capability along with it. So it's kind of those covered. For if you're just having AV in Windows, then it's Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Plan 1. And like I said, that's just bringing you a central console to see your alerts across all endpoints and see their AV statuses and things like that. So it's just bring a console in effect to you for that. And that's included in, you can buy it on its own again, but it's part of Microsoft 365 E3 and Windows Enterprise E3. So a lot of customers already have that. So if you've just kind of got AV and using Windows Defender, you can actually bring it into the portal. So you can start centrally sort of managing it before you go full, EDR sort of capability. And then for servers, so Linux and Windows Server, that is, you can buy licenses through an EA agreement, but the primary way that you can now purchase it is through Defender for Cloud. So you don't have to have Azure Arc enabled to do that. You can just do direct onboarding now. That was a recent feature. But in effect, there is a Plan 1 and Plan 2 up there. So Plan 1 gives you, in effect, Defender for a Server Plan 1. It gives you effectively Defender for Endpoint Plan 2 capability. I know it sounds a little bit confusing, but it's like the full EDR solution. And then Defender for Server Plan 2 in Defender for Cloud gives you, from a Defender for Endpoint perspective, the Defender Vulnerability Management add-on for servers, but also other capability in Defender for Cloud for servers. So there's other capability there, like agentless file scan or vulnerability scanning, and a few other bits like that. They're up there. So there's definitely there's more value to be added there, as well as you get some 500 megabytes per day ingestion free for log analytics as well. So if you've got Microsoft Sentinel and you're ingesting logs from servers, then you can reduce costs, or reduce overall costs that way. The costs there are, at the moment, as far as I'm aware, is $5 for Defender for Server Plan 1. So it gives you all that, that the EDR capability, and then the Plan 2, I think, is $15 from what I can remember. So yeah, that's kind of how it's licensed. Relatively easy. User gets licensed, and then the endpoint does. And like I said, I think you're covered up to 5 devices per user, if I remember, or around that at least. And it's kind of the norm for some of these licenses is sort of 5 endpoints. So yeah.
Cool. Anything else you want to cover, Alan? Anything you think you missed? It's quite a big topic. There's lots of rabbit holes we could go down, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really talk about attack surface reduction for Windows, but that's more around locking down processes that are in Office applications, things like that. So just reducing the risk in effect of potential attacks.
Would you say it's reducing your attack surface, Alan?
Yeah, funny enough, yes. I was trying not to use the same words. Try to explain what it is by using the words that it is. Yes.
That's what it says
Yes,
on the tin.
exactly. But yeah, and I didn't talk about Microsoft Threat Expert. So this is in effect in the background. Microsoft are able to, in the background, they potentially see multiple tenants anonymized, and they can see patterns across the tenants in effect. So they can then generate an alert from them saying, we're seeing some activity in this tenant. They don't know who you are or anything like that. But in effect, you can then get a not on a personalized one, but it's almost like some of the bigger attacks that are happening across the the whole Defender for Endpoint environments. They can then start making identifying where you're potentially being attacked as well.
Thanks, for that, Alan. That was it's a great episode. And yeah, is there a previous episode that you want to call out?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it when we were talking about vulnerability management. So, I mean, I can't believe it's season 2, but season 2, episode 14, Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management, the add-on kind of thing. It's worth going into. To be fair, we probably should. Do we need to update it? No, I don't think too much has changed since then, so we're okay.
Cool.
But yeah, that's probably the only other one. Obviously, Defender XDR a couple of weeks ago, which was season 5, episode 2, just to kind of talk about the general, everything working together. Yeah, that's probably it, I think, for other episodes. What are we doing next week? So,
Next week, we're going to do a news update. So this is January's news. So we're going to try and do a news episode once a month because we don't really think there's enough exciting stuff to do it sooner than that. We'll see how many topics we've got for next week from January. It's not going to be everything. It's going to be what we sort of perceive to be the highlights from the month. So apologies, product team, if we didn't cover your changes, but it's just what we got excited from, basically, in the past month.
cool. Okay. So, did you enjoy this episode? If so, if so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple and Spotify. This really helps us reach more people like you. If you have any specific feedback or suggestions, or as Sam said earlier, if you've got any if you've been offboarded Defender for Endpoint, we'd love to sort of understand why, I guess.
Yeah,
But yeah,
definitely.
there's a note in the show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thank you ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.